Welcome to the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Anita Brooks, and here you'll find teaching topics, interviews, conversations, and coaching tips, all designed to help you level up. We all lead someone. The question is, are we leading well, exceptionally well? So join me on a quest, not for perfection, but absolutely for exceptional leadership. Welcome back to the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. Well, this month we are closing out our emphasis on performance and efficiency and all of those things that frankly drive productivity and profitability. And at the end of the day, if you work for any business or organization, even nonprofits, you still have to pay attention to that bottom line. So anytime that we are looking at these areas, they're going to impact either positively or negatively whether there's profitability for that organization. So I want to talk about some things that are maybe less commonly or unusually discussed when it comes to driving higher performance and productivity, and then looking at efficiency and things of that nature. So the first one I want to talk about is something that is very near and dear to my heart, very personal for me, because I've worked for decades to not only study and learn and observe, but then I've also ended up practicing and developing some products out of this. And so let me just jump right into that. So what I'm talking about is my P4 personality perspective. So I have been doing personality assessments for decades, and I use them for a myriad of things. They are phenomenal. That information can just drive your marketing efforts through the roof. I love to do marketing with P4 personality perspective. But also it can help you with employee morale and engagement and rewards and things of that nature. There's so many areas that you can use this in. Communication. Oh my gosh, there's a plethora of things you can do in communication. But it's really effective as well when you want to look at job fit analysis. And if you are not considering whether you have proper or improper job fits for the people that are working for you, the ones that you're leading, or the people you need to bring into your organization, you're missing the boat. Job fit analysis tells you so much about whether someone is naturally wired to do a certain task or fulfill a certain role. Job fit analysis takes into consideration those natural talents and skills and abilities that all of us have. No, there are strengths and weaknesses to every personality type, but there are some strengths that work especially well in particular industries or fields or particular jobs. And there are some that not so much. That it's like I always say, you absolutely 100% can shove a square peg into a round hole. But if you do, you will spend your money, time, and energy pulling splinters on a regular basis because that individual was not made to fit that role. Now, are there occasionally a rare exception to that? Absolutely. But I am telling you, it is extremely rare. So for instance, a few years ago, I was working with a client and they needed a position filled. And so I was doing a business coaching scope with them, and they asked me if I would help them do an analysis for this role to help them identify the right person. And so they had every applicant do my P4 personality perspective assessment. And so as a result of that, we were able to look at that in conjunction with the applications and resumes. Well, there was one particular applicant who had a stunning resume. I mean, everything on that application and the resume both looked like they would just be ideal for this role. There was only one problem. The Personality assessment showed that they were a popular peaceful. Now, let me give you a little background on this role. In this position, they needed an individual who could interact well with their client base when they came in, but they needed to have this frontline person, because it was a very serious role, be very focused on more getting accurate information, being able to get things that need to be filled out and to put in certain categories. And it was crucial that they be accurate. More so than socializing and making the clients who walked in the door feel good, right? This wasn't the warm and fuzzy, like customer service type of a role. This was more get down to business and let's glean that right information for accuracy. Because if it wasn't accurate, not only was it going to cause challenges for the business itself, but the clients were going to be very, very unhappy. When they walked in the door, they were looking for things to be done well, not so much someone to give them some feel goods. So hopefully that helps. But my concern was the resume and the application that seemed to stand above the rest. Their personality assessment came in as that popular peaceful. And one thing that I know from popular peacefuls is they are very people focused. They want to be helpful. They tend to be kind and compassionate and good listeners, but they aren't necessarily always the best personality mix for paying close attention to detail. And sometimes for them, they may not be as proactive as they need to be to gather appropriate data. So just think about that when you're considering this role that this organization needed filled. So I went to the leadership and we sat down with the resume, the application, and the assessment. And I shared with them the things that I thought looked great and what would make this individual, in my estimation, at least on the surface, appear to be good for that role. But I also shared my concerns. But then I kind of talked myself and them out of those concerns at the back end of it. I immediately started going into, well, this is what I would normally think, but I don't know. I think this might be an exception this time. And I know if it were me, I would probably go ahead and hire them. And I think, it's probably going to work out okay. Oh boy, was that a mistake. So they took my advice. By the way, I would never give that same advice today, but they took that advice. And in less than 3 weeks after bringing this person in, that individual went to leadership. They were crying, actually, and they mutually agreed that it wasn't working out. And so this person left that role. And I learned a valuable lesson. I learned to stop questioning myself. Now, I will say, too, that I did an interview with this individual before I gave my final stamp of approval. And I must tell you, in that interview, there were red flags waiting, and I talked myself into ignoring them. Again, I would not do that today. But when I sat in on that interview, there were things that should have told me that this was probably not going to work out. I say that not because there was anything wrong with that individual. This was an amazing human being. But the particular job that this organization needed filled was not right for them. And so what we did by bringing them in is we essentially set them up to fail. And that wasn't what was going to work for any of us. They were miserable trying to make things work. And it wasn't a matter of them just being new on the job either. I can assure you, all of that was looked at. It was simply that this person was not going to be capable unless they spent a long, long time, a lot of intense effort making it happen, but they weren't going to be capable of meeting the job requirements. And the company, frankly, did not want to spend the amount of money, time, and energy pulling all the splinters along the way to try to force fit this. But that individual themselves also, they knew. And they even said that they were going home at the end of the workday and they were feeling very emotional. So it wasn't working out. I share that with you because many times what I find when I go in and I do business coaching is we will blame people either for one of two things. Now, I will say, okay, let me just go where I was going to go. One of two things. One, either we blame them when there's a broken or missing process at play. And so oftentimes what we see as a people problem is really a process problem. Sometimes with individuals, it is a poor job fit and we've placed them in a role that does not fit well with them. And so it is that splinter pulling situation. And it's not just the business or organization or the leadership that are pulling splinters, that individual is as well. And so then they are miserable and sometimes they become resentful and even bitter. And some will even justify inappropriate behaviors because they're so unhappy where they're placed. So think about that and look around your organization and ask yourself, do we have any improper job fits? If so, where can we move folks so that things fit smoothly instead of us trying to pound them into place? Because when you do that, that will not only improve the mood, the outlook of everyone involved, not only will it reduce the splinter pulling, but here's where it connects to performance. Folks who are naturally adept will always be more efficient in a job. They'll learn faster. They'll do the job faster. They'll make fewer mistakes. They'll be much more accurate. So when this organization that I was doing business coaching with, when that happened with that individual, let me assure you, the next time that we were looking at personality assessments, we were looking for either a perfect powerful or a perfect peaceful. We actually found a very nicely fit perfect peaceful who's still working for that organization today and does an amazing job, but it's because it was the right job fit. So even though the individual may not know all of the technicalities of that job, they're going to be able to learn them faster when it's something that fits their nature well. So consider that. Job fit analysis. It can blacken your bottom line just by making sure that you are evaluating whether or not you've got the right people in the right places. Okay, let's talk about something else when it comes to performance and efficiency. Many times, especially when people have been in a role for a long time, they kind of get into ruts where they start doing the same old task day after day or week after week, month after month. But they do it almost from a mind-numbing place. So they don't really pay attention to what they're doing after they've been there for a while. And I challenge people when I'm doing business coaching, leaders, to take a look at that. And even the individuals who are filling that role, those frontline employees. But I ask them to think about, what are the top 3 most profitable tasks that you do for this organization or that individual does for your organization? And if you have to think about it or do some research to find out or whatever, it's well worth your time investment to do so. Because here's what I find. We've heard of the 80-20 rule. It's become part of our business culture. But I like taking really valuable pieces of information like that and then connecting them to very specific areas. And this is one such area. So looking at the 80-20 rule from this perspective, are we spending 80% of our time on work that only produces 20% of our results? Or can we look at ways to spend 20% of our time working on what produces 80% of our best results? And when I ask people, what are those top 3 most profit-bearing tasks or work projects that you do? It's often really interesting what comes to light. One, sometimes there is research that's needed. And when we start digging into what is truly profitable versus what our gut tells us, oftentimes we find out that we were wrong. And we do need to focus more of our time and energy someplace else. And so when people become more aware of that, consciously intentional about it, what happens is oftentimes they become much more efficient and productive in the areas that are doing the most good for the company that they work for. So I really challenge you that if you've not done anything like that, to work with your people and look at that and figure out what are those top 3 most profitable jobs that they do. And you can break it down. You can do it daily. You can do it weekly. You can do it monthly. You can do it annually. I've done all of that with different clients depending on what their needs were or what their work environment or their processes or their customer client needs were. But just look at that kind of a measurement and then start really making sure that that's where you're putting the priority attention of what you do day in and day out or what your people do day in and day out. But it is a good measuring practice. Okay. Something else is that we often tell ourselves, and I see this, I have to be honest with you, just about every coaching client that I have ever worked with, and I couldn't even tell you how many that's been now, that when I first go in, oftentimes leadership has a very different perspective of training than employees do. Most employees will tell me that they want more training. Some of them are hungry, almost desperate for better training. But oftentimes leaders feel like that they've adequately trained their people. So there can be a couple of things. One, sometimes there's been no training at all and leaders assume that the training took place when it didn't, or they forget that something disrupted what would be a normal training process and that no one ever went back and made sure that that was covered. But another thing is leaders often fail to realize that when someone first starts on a job, they are overwhelmed with information. You talk about TMI. When you are that new person at a workplace and you're trying to learn the company culture as well as the details of the tasks that you're given and the work that you're supposed to conduct, and then, throw in like the different personalities of all the people you work with and all of that, then it gets really muddled sometimes for people trying to retain and remember all of that initial training information that comes their way. So I remind leaders that it's really good to do a follow-up or reinforcement training for your employees somewhere maybe around that 90-day to 6-month period. You'd be amazed at how much deeper their knowledge base goes. And when that happens, there's a couple of things that take place. One, their confidence raises. And when people are confident, it has been proven that they do a much faster and better job. So you want to do everything within your leadership power. And if you're an exceptional leader, you will hear this and you will act on it. But you want to do everything within your leadership power to make sure that your folks, those that you are leading, have the best training possible so that they are elevated to the highest level of confidence. But the other thing is, when you do that follow-up training, sometimes there are little bad habits that have infiltrated their work days, okay? And sometimes it's just something that they just organically picked up and didn't even realize that they were doing. Sometimes it was because assumptions were made because there were maybe little pieces of information that were missing in that first training, or they just forgot it. And sometimes there is, a little bit of employee viral information passing that isn't always best suited for performance and efficiency. So whatever that case is, when you do follow-up training, what it does is it reinforces the opportunities for those people to be able to do the very best job possible in the way that you want them to do it. In other words, to do the job to your expectations, to your specifications. So employee training is not something to just kind of gloss over. Tell yourself, oh, we've trained them. Because I'm telling you right now, if you think that you did a one and done communication to try to develop skills and knowledge and that confidence in folks, you missed the boat. That's not exceptional leadership. You need to make sure that you go deeper with some of that training, because I'm going to tell you, you might think it's a cost, but it's not. It's an investment that will pay off, and it will pay off in time and time again. Not only will they be faster and better at their job, but because they're more confident, statistically, it's been shown they'll be less likely to leave and go work someplace else. And in the job environment that we're in right now, I'm telling you, if you've got employees and they're reliable and dependable, you need to do everything within your power to keep them, because it's getting harder and harder to find good replacements. And remember what I said at the beginning of this point, that a lot of employees feel almost desperate or hungry for training. When you provide that for them, it feels like you're meeting a need. And when you do that, there's an intrinsic loyalty and gratefulness that happens inside of people. Nobody wants to feel embarrassed or dumb about their job or be afraid to ask questions because they think, well, I should know that. And so they just don't. And so they continue making mistakes, or they continue maybe not moving as quickly as they could or should, or they just aren't that effective. Okay, let's talk about something else for improving performance and efficiency on the job. Making sure that you as a leader set clear objectives. You know, again, I just talked about expectations. So many times in leadership, we have certain expectations, but we do not always vocalize those or communicate it. We need to create clear objectives and let the employees know what our expectations are. Because when we do that, that helps improve confidence. It increases loyalty. We are seen as a trustworthy leader when we do that. And then when we create those clear objectives, we need to also make sure that we support them with the necessary tools, resources, and ongoing guidance so our employees can meet their goals. And speaking of goals, make sure that there are measurements in place so people know what the finish lines are, what the targets are, because human nature is we'll work toward finish lines and targets if we clearly understand what they are. But oftentimes in leadership, we don't do that, and we don't keep the measurements in a place where people can visibly see them. We want to make sure that they can find where they're at in the process, and they can maybe work on speeding up if they need to, or streamlining something. But just make sure that your people have everything that they need, from the expectation down to the resources, so that they can do that job to your specs. And let me tell you, when you do that, again, statistically, many studies have shown that employees will produce at a much higher rate, and that lends to profitability. Okay, something else. Look, I just mentioned the word streamline. Streamline your processes. Really look at them. If you need to do a study on some of your processes, do it. But simplify as much as possible by removing all unnecessary steps and eliminating bottlenecks. For instance, I had a client recently, and there was a specific process that had been formulated a long time ago, even with written instructions, and it was being followed. But when they went back and I had them re-review to make sure that everything was necessary, what they determined was there was a whole portion of this process that was redundant because of some new technology that they had put in place a few years ago. And when they put that technology in place, no one thought to go back and review that process. But when they did it, they were able to take a whole lot of unnecessary steps out of the equation, which sped things up tremendously. Here's another thing for streamlining. Eliminating bottlenecks. Leader, I hate to tell you, but too often in my business coaching practice, I find that the leaders are the bottlenecks. Make sure that you are not holding your people up. If they have questions, answer them ASAP. If there's research that needs to be done, then either do it or delegate that research. But get the information to the appropriate people as quickly as possible so that they are not standing around, not only twiddling their thumbs possibly, but also feeling very frustrated. Because most people, when they experience the sensation of productive work, and especially when they're able to complete productive work, there's that feel good that we get of knowing that we have done something well. And like that satisfaction, that sense of satisfaction that we get from doing something well is something people want to replicate. And so you need to do everything in your power to equip them to replicate. You need to help them not feel stifled or stunted in the work that they're trying to do. And so you want to make sure that you eliminate any bottleneck, and that includes you. So if you need to be honest with yourself and just say, you know what? I am the bottleneck. I am the one that's holding things up. Then make the change today. Take whatever action steps are necessary so that that work can continue and it can be done efficiently. Here's another thing that I have found to be not only really effective as far as helping with efficiency and performance and productivity, but it also adds a little fun element. And that is, if you, and I understand this is not possible everywhere, but if you can make any kind of games out of the work, competitions. I have some clients that they have integrated some of their measurements, like their progress measurements, along with employee incentives and created like a game like competition so that it causes employees to want to work toward that end game they want to win. Okay. I have some clients, I have a manufacturing client right now that what we've done, because in their culture, they decided that they didn't want to pit employees against each other. And there are some ways you can create friendly competition that doesn't feel that way. But in their culture, that wasn't going to work. And so what we did with them is we created kind of a gamification, if you will, so that it was simply the employee competing against themselves. So every single day, they had certain numbers that they were shooting for. So they knew, what the finish line was supposed to look like. And then they could start working toward it. Now, this may or may not be your philosophy. I know that it won't be for everyone. But in this case, the leadership even said, I don't care if they work their tail ends off for 5 hours a day and they've met their numbers or they're near their numbers, then they can be more relaxed those last 3 hours of the day. I don't care. As long as those numbers are met, that's what we need for net profitability. That's what I care about. And so I'm good with it. And there are some employees who work really, really well under those conditions. They like that flexibility of feeling as if they can be in control. They're in charge of not only what they do, but how they go about the work. And so they embrace it. And so you have some employees in their organization who have gotten it pretty much down to a science. I mean, some of them really crack me up, but like you have some who will work really hard the first early part of the day, and they get as much as done as they can so that they can kind of, slide a little bit those last couple of hours. It kind of reminds me of being in high school. I remember when I was in high school, I got some really good advice to work hard on my required subjects in my freshman and sophomore year so I could more enjoy my junior and senior year. And I took that advice to heart. I did it. And let me tell you, I had a whole lot more fun in my junior and senior year. And I think it's a very similar concept in this case. Now, in this company, they actually have two people who do the opposite way. I'm going to be honest with you. For me, I would not be comfortable with this if I was that employee, but it's working extremely well. So you know what? I'm not going to tell anybody to fight it either. But what they do is they're not morning people. So they actually allow themselves to move a little bit slower that first couple of hours. And then they really, hoof it the heavier part of the day. And that works well for them. They're hitting their numbers and sometimes they're exceeding them. And I will tell you, part of the gamification process with this company that we are implementing is we also just recently have worked to create an incentive program so that if people exceed their numbers, then there's an incentive at play for them. So again, it kind of adds to that fun, kind of playful element, but this is also another way to pump up the volume on the productivity and the performance. And we're seeing fantastic results with that. So these are some of the ways that I have found in my work as a business coach that maybe you haven't thought of. They're not necessarily the first place that most businesses or organizations go to when they're thinking about ways to drive performance. But let me end on this note. One thing that I cannot state enough is people are motivated so much more by compliments than they are criticism. If your leadership style up to this point has been one where you feel like you can't, give people too many compliments, or you can't encourage them too much because then they'll slack, they'll get lazy, they'll get lackadaisical. Let me just caution you, recheck that, because that's not statistically what's been shown in study after study. When people feel safe, they feel encouraged, they feel supported, they feel cared for. And we don't necessarily like to use that terminology in the workplace, but I'm going to tell you, as an exceptional leader, you need to consider this. But when people have those kinds of experiences, that's their perception, then they will not only be more efficient, not only will they perform at a higher rate, but they will be more accurate doing the job right the first time more often than not. Leader, if that does not tell you something, I don't know what will. Conversely, those leaders who are constantly criticizing, who make employees feel like they can never do anything good enough or they can't do anything right, it has been shown time and time again that people are slower. They're more timid. They're afraid of tripping up or making a mistake. And so that fear actually causes them to hold themselves back. They don't have the confidence that they're going to get it right. And they're afraid of any kind of retaliation, whether it's some kind of direct or indirect, whether it's blatant or it's a kind of a subconscious type of a reaction. But regardless, when people live in fear of that, then they don't get as much done because that anxiety is smothering their ability to think logically. And when people don't have the clarity of mind to think logically, then they are hindered in the work that they do. So consider that. And if you haven't ever done it or if you haven't done it in a long while, let me leave you with this coaching challenge today, leader. Really assess yourself and ask yourself, am I creating an environment that makes people feel encouraged, feel supported, feel confident that they are or are capable of not only doing the job well, but doing it to my expectations? Am I more focused on catching them doing things right or doing things wrong? Or am I that leader who scares people, who intimidates them, who comes across as impatient and not easily or maybe ever satisfied with what people do? If after an honest assessment, you answer that you're in that second category, I'm not sharing this to beat you up. This is my coaching challenge. You can't change what happened up until this moment. But from this moment forward, you can change what you're doing. And you can raise the bar. You can become an exceptional leader that your people not only feel as if they can meet your approval, but your people are so loyal to you, they're so grateful to you, that they will do almost anything within their power to please you, to do the job, because you have made them feel better as a human being. Might feel a little bit like warm and fuzzy here at the end, but I'm just telling you it works. And you can argue against it, you can discount what I've just said, or maybe you can try to embrace it and see what happens for you. Well, until next time, I just want to remind you as always, stay intentional and be exceptional. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. There's magic in meeting with an objective, and I always have an objective for you, not only in these episodes, but also from the other resources I offer on my website, anitabrooks.com. That's ANITABROOKS.com. There you'll find information on digital courses, webinars, books, workbooks, of course, my in-person P4 power coaching for businesses and organizations. And if you need a speaker for your conference or your strategic retreat, I'm your gal. But I'm also excited to let you know about a new service that we're offering. For less than half the price of a daily Starbucks latte for a month, you can join our P4 Power Coaching community. This is a monthly membership where you'll get insider tips. And you'll also be able to join our monthly Zoom meetings that are one part strategy sessions, one part mastermind, one part networking, one part coaching. I can promise you, you'll not only learn from me, but you'll learn from others in the group. We'll also have monthly webinars as part of the P4 Power Coaching community, and we'll have coaching resources and exercises. And you'll get first opportunities and special offers for many of the other things that we have to offer. And of course, you will get leadership encouragements. The P4 Power Coaching community is all about growth, success, and celebrating our wins. And remember, it's never too late for a fresh start with fresh faith. So embrace your exceptional leadership impact with fresh resolve to make the difference you were made for.